the area, and they're going to build a fire station for the thing. But at this point in time, this government and the last have been trying to make sure national insurance don't pay any money. If you got unemployment benefits now, you apply for unemployment benefits. All those people that call insurance officers try to find it possible to make sure they cut back on the benefits that they are paying to workers to save a few cents. And nobody in Barbados can tell me that national insurance knows how much money they got. Yeah? Because I hear they have audited financial system. I don't believe them. Because a few years ago, the police went into a house and carried over $1 million of property that a lady who worked in the National Insurance Department had 8-9 years ago. And National Insurance funds, National Insurance did not realize it.
Mr. President, the honourable member really is going way beyond his boundary. The audited financial statements of the National Insurance are normally laid in both chambers annually. To make a flippant statement that he doesn't believe there are any audited financial is totally inaccurate and incorrect. And the honourable member should be asked to withdraw that statement.
Sir, I said I don't believe them. Because when National Insurance audited their financial statements were published, they didn't even know they were missing millions of dollars. That's what I'm talking about. So I am not satisfied that National Insurance has all the money that this government thinks it has, because the last administration, every time they...
question is whether they were audited, or you don't believe that they were audited?
No, sir. I said they were audited, but I don't believe the outcome. Because when they were audited, they didn't realize millions were missing. You had audited financial statements, but millions were missing and nobody knew. You know, National Insurance find out. The bank called National Insurance and said, "This woman deposited so much money." National Insurance didn't know. Over $1 million in supplies plus air trips and all kind of stuff. So National Insurance said no. So we don't know how much money National Insurance really got, you know. Just like the Treasury don't know how much money the Treasury got any one day either, simply because they went into something called accrual accounting. So you know how much the Treasury is going to get or should get, but not much it has. So we are doing a lot of foolishness pretending that we got money. And we are using National Insurance funds that are put aside for your pension and my pension and the pension of everybody in Barbados, and you are taking them up every so often, and you're talking about investments. But you're investing too much in buildings. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. No, if you want to invest National Insurance money, invest in something else. You can't be invested in all these buildings because government won't build a building, and government doesn't have the resources, and they're raiding the National Insurance funds. National Insurance has to be protected from government, you know. Government is abusing the National Insurance. That is not government's money to spend. It is money placed in trust for people who, in their latter years, and people who need unemployment benefits. But as I tell you, sickness benefits, unemployment benefits, and related benefits, and you are finding ways to cut back on those benefits and using the National Insurance money to fund government capital works program. It is wrong. You see, well, it is wrong morally. Legally, you can do it. And I'm saying to you, it is time that something happens where National Insurance is ring-fenced, and so to make sure that the Minister of Finance and anybody else cannot get their hands on National Insurance funds so easily. It's the travesty, you know when people can start worrying? When they apply to National Insurance, they can't get them pensions. And you will say, oh, but we have a nice fire station. That's the problem. Right now, only yesterday, a young lady approached me because she got dismissed from one of those slave plantations on the West Coast hotel. And she applied for unemployment benefits. And they have a rules that they use. You lose your job because of your misconduct, your own misconduct, so you lose up to 6 weeks. That is a method of trying to squeeze people. Because I represent so many people who go before the tribunals to appeal those decisions. One, When we went before the chairman, I told the chairman, I said, I don't want producing evidence. I asked the young lady who disqualified her why she did it. You know what she said? Oh, you know, I could take off 6, so I give she 3 and I keep 3. That is the reasoning that a national insurance officer told a national insurance appeals tribunal that they'd reduce the benefits that a person was getting because of their own misconduct. I will never forget that. The young lady yesterday, she was on vacation. The bank, the employer paid her vacation. And then said to her, oh, your vacation wasn't approved, but the vacation money went to the bank, and dismissed her because she missed work for 3 days. And national insurance take off the woman's benefits. So they are finding ways not to pay national insurance benefits to people and taking this money and financing government's capital works program. It has to stop. It is not government money for the government to use. You know how much taxes we pay? That's what the taxes for. Mind you, we pay taxes, and then government come a lot of fees, a lot of foolish fees. Just the most recent was the post office. These little notices that you get, you used to pay $1.50. Government no saying you're going to pay $10. Post office asked the government to get them $5. The government said no, 10. So we having all kind of fees on water, everything else, and you still charge you still pay a bunch of taxes. The taxes are made for those things. That's what taxes are for. If we want money to build a fire station, look into the consolidated fund and see if you have it. Do not go to national insurance and keep on raiding national insurance, because when that happens, you, sir, might not get your national insurance pension. It's as simple as that. Because national insurance don't have much money to got. And they don't care how many people from national insurance or the leader can tell me that they know. I know they don't. Because when they are, mind you, they're washed in funds, but they don't know how much. So when you keep on taking out from the wash, you don't know how much you're taking. You're taking a lot, but you don't know how much left back. Because I don't trust the accounting. Sir, this is a warning. Tell government 2 things to me. We got a green space just called Independence Square. You can spit from Independence Square where you can make this green space. No, you don't need 2 so close. What is the real motive behind this? I don't believe what you're telling me. What is the real motive? Why are we now pulling down the old national insurance building, destroying the fire station? Yes, I do fire station want fixing. I might even want redoing, but we don't on the same spot. Unless they make the green space smaller, then that's all. You are putting Barbadians at risk. You are putting people in these big buildings in Bridgetown at risk. Where the fire station can run across the road and get the building on Broad Street. Now, the people trapped inside. There are people dying in a building in Bridgetown when some fool threw a Molotov cocktail and the fire station was in Bridgetown. So what can happen now if something similar happens and it's all over town? More will die. We need to stop this foolishness, you know. I don't know what possesses this government. Every so often you come in here with these harebrained schemes and try to convince us. And the thing is, you do not allow it to go through, and the country let people have their say on it. They come too fast. Because I have one, there's another one coming soon that coming too fast too, and I can speak on that. So the people in the country, you like a whirlwind. Hit fast, and nobody don't know what's happening. When you're talking about the people that got Paragon with the coronavirus, that one got hiding? That's what you're talking about? No, he's telling me about the people that at Paragon that have hiding out the coronavirus inside the country. Neither, you know, they hide everything from the people in this country. They tell you? Or you're not born in you, when people hide them? Huh? So, you see, but you don't leave me. Because when you keep telling me, I can ask you things that you think. Because I heard that we have people suspected of having the coronavirus in Barbados, but our government don't want to acknowledge it.
Mr.
President, I'm sorry.
No, but he was bugging me.
On point of order,
In some jurisdictions, you cannot scream fire in a crowded room because you do not want to panic and alarm people. You cannot, because as a matter of fact, this morning, Mr. President, on my way down to the Senate, I was listening to the BBC radio, and they said a journalist was charged with spreading false information about the coronavirus. Because clearly when you spread false information about public health issues, you panic people. You create a public nuisance, Mr. President. So I must rise on a point of order and ask that you ask my colleague to desist from spreading false information and retract it, because the only purpose it can have is to injure this country and injure the individuals in this country from going about their daily business peacefully. And for what, Mr. President? I am begging you to ask for a retraction from my colleague.
Mr. President,
I'm sure you'll retract it. I'm sure.
no, there's no question of retracting anything. Senator Walker was talking to me and I asked him if he's talking about the people that have acquired guns.
Senator Franklin, I'm sure you're going to retract that statement.
So not at all.
No.
I asked
Franklin?
Senator Walker a question. If you're talking about the people that have acquired
Senator
guns.
Franklin, could you please retract the statement?
No, sir, I'm not.
Okay.
You can strike it from the record as much as you like. But I'm saying to you, if Senator Walker wasn't asking me questions, I responded to him, I wouldn't have responded the way I did. He asked me, you talking about the people that acquired guns? Because I got people that acquired guns, I hid away from the public all it now. That is not a rumor, that's a fact.
But to say that you understand that there are people in Barbados with corona.
Suspect, I said.
No, but could you retract that, Senator Franklin?
Sir, I understand that people suspected of having the coronavirus and they hid away from the public at Paragon. I heard that. Senator Walker could deny it.
Well, it's not going to go through that statement is on the record. That should be struck from the record.
Well, sir, as you wish. Oh, the 14 days gone?
Not federal is
The 14 days gone?
You need to start reading and understanding and speaking.
All right, let's continue.
See, if they don't start heckling, they wouldn't hear these things, you know.
First, it is in the paper.
Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, I would like to get back to the national insurance, the looting of national insurance
How many more military
by this government and the last. This government, what they call a haircut. They took national insurance money, can't afford to pay it back, and then in the restructuring of the debt, national insurance took a big hit. And before national insurance said, don't you want to get them another hit again? It is not the government money. Government has this money in trust. And it seems as though we can't trust the government to keep national insurance money safe. Because it isn't only this administration, the last one did it. I know you come in and you excel, you know everything that you do better. So you are marching up national insurance and you are trying to take another step and do it better than them. Stop using national insurance to finance government capital works program. There is no need. No, you say, look, you build a house. You won't finish the decorating inside the house. You won't finish the plastering and stuff. But you want to have nice lavish grounds. You know? You need to fix what needs to be fixed first, and then you can take care of those green spaces. Then you have the money to do it. You do not have the money to do it. Stop looting national insurance to make yourselves look good, or to promise people that you're going to do something for them, or you're going to do whatever else you want to do. Use the resources of the government. You know, there's a saying, champagne tastes, but Mobby pockets. Right now, we don't even have Mobby, we ain't even got Mobby pockets. But we're going out and using other people's money to finance. When it's other people, I mean the other people of this country. This is not government money to use. And we've done it too much, and we lost a lot of it. Who's going to give it back? That is money put aside out of your salary and my salary and everybody else's salary. I think I have enough money to get a pension from national insurance in another few years. But if you continue like this, I wouldn't get it. Stop wasting national insurance money. Stop with these harebrained schemes, because right now there is no urgent need for this green space right now. If you want a green space, and I don't have any problem with green spaces, but do it when you can afford it, when you have the money. And government is doing everything possible to nickel and dime the people of this country, especially poor people, carrying away their monies and doing all manner of, I don't know. I don't know what to call it, sir. Because they're taking away too much money from the people. People are now working for the government. Your tax bill, tax, national insurance, and VAT, when you take those into consideration, you pay more money to the government than you pay in the supermarket and the other bills. And now you can go and take the national insurance money. Sir, I hope you people will consider this. This is nonsense. Thank you very much, sir.
I recognize Senator Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I share Senator Franklin's concern about access to Bridgetown at peak hours in the mornings and in the evenings. And the proposal to put the headquarters for the fire service in the Pine worries me. And it worries me because I've not seen any surveys of traffic, but every road leading back to Bridgetown has schools on them. And Mr. President, if you look at the traffic congestion in the summertime, there's none. And if you go on these roads today, at peak times, especially when the schools are opening and when they're closing, it is obvious, the difference is so obvious that you could probably walk to Bridgetown faster than you can run. I accept that the fire service doesn't only respond to fires. Firemen have other statutory duties. They're supposed to do, for example, building and safety inspections. And hopefully, when the fire service is settled in its new headquarters, rather than having to respond to some of the fires and issues like that, they would have prevented them by making sure that all the safety requirements that are enforceable are met. Mr. President, I am happy that government has chosen to add another park to Bridgetown. But I ask, to what end? We have probably the most beautiful park in any Caribbean city, and it's called the Village Green. And I am willing to bet that within this chamber, there will not have been 10 people who visited it. 10. 10. No. But, Mr. President, we build these parks and we spend large sums of money in redeveloping areas, and the redevelopment of the Constitution River happened several years ago, and it's a beautiful space. But it's largely occupied by rats. Nobody uses it. And I ask, why? Why is it that government spent so much money creating this beautiful space? The turtles have come back into the Constitution River. I can view it from the QEH and the third floor, but people don't use it. So if you're going to build a new park, I hope that when the park is constructed, whatever it is that stops Barbadians and visitors from using these areas would have been fixed, so that when a large amount of money is spent, that the people who live here and who visit will be able to use these spaces as they should be. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
I recognize Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. It was not my intention, Mr. Deputy President, to speak on this matter today because I could find nothing of substance on the matter of a land acquisition for the purpose of constructing a fire station at the Pine, Mr. President, because I assume that the government has within its bosom an arsenal of planners, city planners. The role of the ministry with responsibility for the town and country planning division is appropriately staffed with skilled and qualified experts, Mr. President, who are not in and of themselves of the political class, but they are of the technical class. And I'm assuming, Mr. President, that if the government has made a determination that those persons who receive a salary on a monthly basis would have done their due diligence and that they would not have made a recommendation or signed off on a recommendation for a land acquisition process, Mr. President, without being able to demonstrate that they're worth the strength of their respective qualifications. So I had no intention, Mr. President, of speaking on this matter. However, given the incendiary comments, and I use the words incendiary comments in this instance, Mr. President, deliberately given that we are discussing a fire station, made by my colleague across the table, in particular on the question of the role of the NIS in financing this process, I took the occasion to rise on my feet. Not Senator Maynard, Mr. Deputy President. I'm speaking in this instance about the goodly Senator Franklin in this instance. And Mr. President, no, I understand that there is a certain attractiveness around incendiary headlines, and I use the term again. I know there is an attractiveness around things like looting and those kinds of terms that would be used to generate a certain level of interest, Mr. President, especially when we're talking about the NIS. Froth versus substance, Mr. Deputy President. But I want to take a moment again, Mr. President, to attempt to treat to matters with a little bit more soberness. And I want to take a moment, Mr. President, to treat to matters with a little bit more deliberateness and some measure, Mr. President, because I seek not those headlines, but we seek in this chamber, and we should be seeking at this time in this chamber, Mr. President, to educate, to inform, and to do so from a position of knowledge. Now, I heard, as I was re-entering the room, something that I believe I may have misheard, Mr. President, but I don't know if it was possible that in the halls of this chamber and not in a rum shop somewhere in Rock Hall, Mr. President, after having consumed several drinks, that you toss out loose statements about hiding people with coronavirus. I am sure that that was not what I heard in this chamber, Mr. President. It may have been said somewhere else. But if that is the case, that is most unfortunate that we have deteriorated to that level. And I know we've come low before, but I can't imagine that that is something that would have been said from this platform. Most unbecoming of any of us, if that is what I heard. But I'm sure I misheard. But I want to come back to the national insurance, Mr. President. Now, if you were to assess the functioning of any pension fund anywhere in the world, and there are many of them in particular, Mr. President, functioning globally, you have entities functioning with the support of the government, of various governments who are in some instances represented here in Barbados, who through their respective, sometimes trillion-dollar pension funds, engage in capital works, infrastructure projects, because it is not a raiding, a looting, a gifting of the monies, but it is an investment for the purpose of generating a return on investment. Now in Barbados, for example, whether we are engaging with NIS funds, commercial bank funds, development bank funds, one key thing runs through all of them, Mr. Deputy President, and it is a question of a return on investment by virtue of an interest rate. You don't gift money, Mr. President. You are loaning money for the purpose of generating a return on an investment by definition in a pension fund, and that pension fund invests in projects that are able to generate that return on investment that gives a return on the persons who are.
The point of order is that,
She is misleading the Senate.
okay.
So I generally love to listen to her, but she is getting ahead of herself and does not understand how it works. The national insurance funds are not lent out by any due diligence or anything like that. This is what happens. Government wants some money, or somebody who wants national insurance money. National Insurance Board do what they call their due diligence, and the minister says, the board says no, the minister says grant anyhow. That is what happens in Barbados. It happens with Capita, when the credit union bought Capita. It happens with a whole lot of other stuff. The board is appointed by the minister. The minister directs them, and even when the board had enough gonads to say that this is not suited, the minister has the power to override. So this is not a case of due diligence. So that's not what happens. You are misleading not only the Senate, but the country. The real procedure is the minister then says, no, I don't mind what you say, lend the money.
No point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. Now, if I may continue, a pension fund is supposed to generate a return on investment. And if a pension fund, just like any commercial entity, determines that on any given day it has X amount of funds in its accounts, it is supposed to be lending that money or investing that money for the purpose of generating a return on investment for the beneficiaries, namely in this instance the very workers about whom we are speaking. Mr. President, I am not going to get into a discussion on what the feelings are, because we've already heard for the course of today people who don't believe audits, who feel there are people being hidden. So I'm sorry, but I believe there's a credibility question here. I have full confidence in the officials in the performance of their jobs. And there is an investments committee, Mr. President, that functions beneath the board of the National Insurance Fund. There is an arsenal of professionals employed by the National Insurance Fund, and then there's a board that sits on top of that. And I have every confidence, Mr. President, that they engage in their respective due diligence, and I would not stand here and cast aspersions on any of their jobs or on their credibility by saying otherwise. And so, Mr. President, I rise only for the purpose of saying that the notion, once again, that the NIS is being looted or being raided is not accurate. Secondly, the purpose of a pension fund is to find investments that can be capitalized, that give a guaranteed return on investment. Those are the kinds of projects that the NIS should be funding. And if we're talking, Mr. President, in my final point about the last administration versus this administration, last administration, yes, raided the national insurance for projects that cannot yet be seen, returns that you cannot see, projects that never came to the table. In this incarnation, you're talking about projects that you can see where the money is going. You can see where the projects are being generated, and there is a rate of return guaranteed to the fund itself. And so, Mr. President, I would not wish to allow those comments to remain on the basis of loose, wild, normal, customary speculation as we have become accustomed to in this space, but on the basis of the facts. And I wish to support the resolution, Mr. President.
Thank you. I recognize Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I must confess that initially I did not intend to speak to this resolution. I believe, sir, that this is a very simple resolution that seeks to secure land identified for the Barbados Fire Service. And of course, I, like Senator Cummins, believe that all of the necessary scientific work would have been done to ensure that the correct actions are being undertaken. Now, I did hear a comment, Mr. President, being made about Bridgetown being at risk with the fire station moving to the Pine Plantation area. And I want to inform the chamber that the national fire prevention guidelines require a response time to any fire situation of 4 minutes. The Barbados Fire Service, as far as I'm aware, has undertaken real-time assessments, and the time from pine plantation, sir, is less than 4 minutes. In fact, while Senator Franklin makes reference to Bridgetown, I believe, sir, that all areas in Barbados need to be certain and secure with respect to response from the Barbados Fire Service. And while, yes, Bridgetown is a commercial environment, there are other commercial environments as well. There are also households that consideration has to be given to. And I'm happy to know that the government of Barbados is in no way putting Bridgetown at risk. I'm happy to know that the response time to get from the proposed new fire service is less than what the national prevention guidelines provide. And therefore, I'm extremely happy to support the resolution. I think that it is important for us to be able to support this resolution that provides for a new fire service. Mr. President, only 2 days ago, we had a situation where at the landfill, the tires were burning. And there was good response from the Barbados Fire Service. They have all of the adequate equipment that is necessary. And of course, we would want to ensure that with a new fire service, that there's utilization of the new technologies as well. Sir, I sometimes watch a show on television called Chicago Fire. I believe it's Chicago Fire, that's what it's called. And you see firemen and paramedics in action. And if there's one thing I take from that show and I would want to encourage, is that outside of any basic training which fire officers may get with respect to providing emergency medical services, that we could also look at the possibility of having persons better trained that can provide paramedic services as well. I think it is important for us as we speak about the provision for a new fire service, that at the same time we look at the new realities and see how we can better facilitate and safeguard Barbadians, not just Barbadian businesses, but Barbadians as well. I want to say, sir, with respect to the burning of the tires at the landfill, I'm happy to report, sir, that that has been brought under control. The reality is that when the officers of the fire service and the SSA were able to cover the area, there was a change in the wind direction, and that complicated matters. The wind direction changed again yesterday, and that further complicated matters, but the officers have reported that things are under control. Of course, we have to look at further options. We do have, sir, in the budget for the next financial year, the SSA, the provision of a shredder. It is interesting to note that there was a shredder in operation, I believe, up to 2010. But there was no consideration given by the last administration after that shredder was no longer functioning for that shredder to function. Of course, sir, we have also been having discussions with our Watt cement plant about the utilization of their kiln. The truth is, the best option is to be able to burn those tires. And I want to give the public of Barbados the assurance that we are actively reviewing the options, and we will take a decision very shortly with respect to how we will be able to deal with that issue. Sir, like I said,
Shredder removes the wire from the tires. What the
Mr. Deputy President, you are getting me into the technical realm. You know, I'm not a technical man, but it does. It removes. It removes a lot of the elements, but really brings it into very, very minute and small particles that you can be utilized. And that you can also facilitate the use of that for word works as well. But when the tires go into the kiln, what happens is that everything burns. But we are looking at the options, of course, sir. I am not a technical person in that area, and I have to be guided by the technical people. But I want to give the public of Barbados the assurance that we are looking at the options very seriously. You know, Mr. President, as I said before, the response time is appropriate. The truth is that with respect to the landfill, you know, the truth is that yes, outside of Bridgetown, the fire service maybe would have responded a little faster. But the reality is this: the real question is, based on the statement that was made by Senator Franklin, what are the facts? And the facts are, sir, that there has been a scientific approach. The Barbados Fire Service has undertaken to make the actual drive to actually carry out such a function to see what the response is, and the response time, sir, is less than 4 minutes, which is highlighted in the National Prevention Guidelines. Continually, you know, Senator Franklin comes to the chamber and makes statements not based on the facts. And I would want to encourage him, sir, in the future, that when he comes to this chamber and he comments, that he brings the facts with him, because the people of Barbados wish to hear from us as senators the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Sir, with those few words, I'm obliged.
Let me see to wrap up. Let me see to wrap up. Senator Moore?
Mr. President, to just shed a little light on, and I do thank senators for their comments and their input, but to shed a little clarity and a little light on some of the matters to do with this fire station for the edification of some who may not recognize all of the issues. So I think I may need to just, and bear with me, Mr. President, explain some of them in detail. The current fire station is in a poor condition. There is tremendous deterioration of the building. The conditions of the place are not one that one would want to continue with. There are issues with the roof. The area suffers from flooding. There's termite infestation. Some of the fire officers are not even housed at the fire station. They're actually at the GPO, the 5th floor, the General Post Office. Clearly, as was articulated in here today, we are concerned about the event of fires. So we would want to take measures to ensure that this situation is brought under control and not just left to the vagaries of time, and something happens and then we say we should have done this or we should have done that. You know, you've got to remember that Bridgetown is an area where we all know climate change is causing sea levels to rise. And many countries, there's a decentralization of a lot of essential services to protect the citizens of these countries, like ours. We are an island state, and we're not going to wait until disaster, something happens to us. We're going to be proactive in what we do as a government to be responsible to the citizens of our country. this fire station does not just service, as some in here would lead us to believe, buildings in Bridgetown. This fire service services almost the entire, a good part of St. Michael, St. George, Christ Church, and parts of St. James. So for those who think the fire service is only run around in Bridgetown, similar to the bus that runs around in Bridgetown, the City Circle bus, this is not the City Circle bus. This is the Barbados Fire Service. And let me repeat, servicing not just Bridgetown, but a good part of St. Michael, Christ Church, St. George, and parts of St. James. 32% of our population is serviced by this fire station. So for those who want to leave the fire station there, where it is cramped, where it's not able to expand and provide some of the services that are needed in a modern environment of the 21st century. And those who feel that our fire service only puts out fires, you know, it's a pity that some of us do not perhaps read a little more, maybe get a little better information, and come, you know, with these sort of
digital thinking.
I will stop there, Mr. President, but I would just say that a fire service, now modern day fire services, not only do they go to put out fires, there's training involved, and there's all types of training required that sometimes it needs to be done within the fire station itself. And I'm talking about modern day techniques. This is not 1929. This is 2020. So we have to look at the world that we have today and make the decisions that could take Barbados forward as a country and not retrograde steps as has been suggested in here by some. So clearly we would not want to do that. I also heard the comments, Mr. President, and I said, should I or should I not? But I decided I should. You're talking about a $20 million investment and a $4 billion fund. Now, Mr. President, you know, I'm not the best with the mathematics and stuff. I tend to defer to some of my colleagues who are more well-versed in that area, like Senator Adams and people like that. But even in my limited scope of basic arithmetic, a $20 million investment is not going to sink a $4 billion fund. I just can't see that. I'm trying to conceptualize it, but maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But, you know, in some people's imagination, that, you know, there was a slogan we once used for just beyond our imagination when we speak about Ireland. Well, it seems that some things are just beyond the imagination of some of my colleagues, Mr. President. And I also would like to say as well that, and this one I must say, the fire station that will be constructed in the environs of the city of Bridgetown, but in a suitable location in St. Michael, gives it access to all of the other areas that it has to service in a timely manner. So this thing about, oh, if something happens in Bridgetown, you can't get there. Ludicrous. That's like saying because the hospital's in Bridgetown, if something happens, you can't get there. That's like saying, because you're not going, it's not just Bridgetown you're servicing. And the thing about walk at schools, so when I'm going to St. George or Christ Church or St. James, the fire service is not to go there because there's a school on the way to St. James or Christ Church or whatever. There's schools all over Barbados. There's 68 primary schools, 21 secondary schools, and 4 tertiary institutions just by the government, much less the myriad private institutions that are around. The arguments Mr. President made in here really shouldn't, I don't know what to say. All I can say on this, Mr. President, is that the fire station will be moving to an appropriate location that makes sense for the 21st century. And the last thing I want to say, Mr. President, is, you know, I remember seeing in today's Nation newspaper, Mr. President, the Minister of Health, speaking about the difficulties of what's being faced. I'm talking about misinformation being the greatest challenge for one of the great challenges for health. Misinformation. Why do we get misinformation? Because people put up all kinds of things on social media. Social media has its benefits, but it can also be a very dangerous place where, because it's not regulated in much the same way as a lot of the traditional media is, people put up all kinds of things and people believe it. You know, you even hear people talk about people practicing internet medicine and just taking things at face value. They read something somewhere. And this seems to be another circumstance. I'm not sure where my fellow senator got his information. You know, this conspiracy theories. What become of these conspiracy theories? You know, years ago, Mr. President, when I was a child, they had a program. It's called Star Trek. And I remember the thing they talk about, beam me up, Scotty. You know, people, it lost in some futuristic world of conspiracies and nonsense. There's no one at Paragon. And there's no suspected cases roaming the streets. This type of misinformation really needs to stop, because it's bad enough when we are trying to explain to people, do not go to areas where the information is not credible or cannot be verified as being accurate when you're trying to deal with a situation in your country. But the worst place to be hearing the information certainly would be a place like the Honorable Senate, where one would expect that all of us senators will be responsible people and do what we know is right for our country and our citizens. This is not the place for petty type activity. This is the place for serious approaches to serious issues that confront our country and will continue to confront our country, because Barbados, although an island, is not an island by itself. So, having said all that, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution now pass.
The question is that this resolution do now pass. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no.
No.
The resolution has been passed.
So what? You got to fight for the resolution?
Yes.
You know what? The mic's off? Mr. President?
A divide has been called.
Senator Walker.
Aye.
Senator Moore.
Aye.
Senator McConney.
Aye.
Senator Dr. Springer.
Aye.
Senator Grant.
Aye.
Senator Cummins.
Aye.
Senator Dr. Haynes.
Aye.
Senator Sands.
Aye.
Senator Adams.
Aye.
Senator Franklin.
No.
Senator Drakes.
Abstain.
Senator Rogers. Senator Boyce.
Aye.
Senator Maynard.
Aye.
Senator Nurse.
Aye.
20 and 2 abstentions.
1 abstention from the Straits and
One.
1 no from Franklin.
Mr. Acting President, the how many?
13,
13 honorable senators voted in favor of the resolution. There was 1 abstention and 1 senator voted against.
The numbers therefore are 13 aye, 1 no, 1 abstention. The resolution has been passed.
Order number 1, sir. In the name of the Honorable Senator Lucille Moore, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 228, the compulsory acquisition by the Crown of a parcel of land, the property of Marriott Barbados Limited, situate at Harry Smith in the parish of St. Philip in this island, for the public purposes of housing and tourism development.
Mr. President, I'm moving this to acquire a parcel of land situated at Harry Smith in the parish of St. Philip. This land is to be used for both housing and a tourism development. Now, we are well aware, Mr. President, of the demands for housing. Housing is always an issue anywhere where people are looking for housing within an area in which they're comfortable. Now, this area of St. Philip is an area where this particular parcel of land really has no housing on it. It's not developed currently. It's a very large tract. And certainly for people within the environs of that part of Barbados, it is quite a suitable area for housing. Simply because it is close to a major artery that takes you from St. Philip into the surrounding areas of Christchurch and further down into St. Michael if need be. It is certainly on a major track that allows you to then access also highways that take you to other parts of Barbados. So it's quite suitable for the intended purpose of housing. And certainly sometimes we do hear that people say that in some of the outlying areas of Barbados, there's oftentimes not enough housing developments for the use of those individuals. You know, one always remembers that this decentralization in mind, and to ensure that all communities have access to some level of housing and not just particular communities. Now, the land is also going to be used as well, as I said, for tourism development purposes. Now, certainly St. Philip is well known for other tourism developments that are currently ongoing in St. Philip. There's one that has been quite expansive in its use and types of variety offered in terms of what that particular development gives to the tourism product. And certainly we would want to see continuous investment in our country, certainly within that sector. Okay, it is a major sector for us, Barbadians. That has not changed, and I don't see that is going to be any change to that in the foreseeable future. As a matter of fact, tourism, I think the slogan is our business, and it really is in more ways than one. So when we have an opportunity to continue on that track of having further investments within this sector, one will always take that opportunity and look at it within the realm of what is being contemplated. Now, this is really a simple acquisition. It's not complex. It is, as I said, a tract of parcel of land. It's just land. There's no structures that are in use within the confines of this area. So I don't expect there really needs to be much more said than that. I think everybody knows the necessity for providing housing to individuals, and I think we all in here understand the necessity for always enhancing our tourism product. And so with those very, very few and very, very brief words, Mr. President, I move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, sir. This resolution makes me very concerned about the role of the opposition and the funding of the opposition. I have been given so much information in the last 2 days or so in my research on this resolution, that it is not fair for us to have this resolution done without canvassing the public, canvassing Barbados, letting people know what we are doing. This thing is happening too fast. The opposition does not have resources to do the necessary research. And if the information that I have is accurate, and I do not know if it is accurate, I didn't have the time to check all of my sources, then this acquisition would be a major scandal for this country. We already have to suffer through the embarrassment of having one former minister being tried in New York, tried and convicted for misdeeds done here. We are rushing this, and it looks bad. Sir, I have him. First of all, let me tell you, we are acquiring this property from Marriott Barbados Limited. There is no such company in Barbados. And it hasn't been a company called Marriott Barbados Limited since the 29th of December, 1998. Marriott Barbados Limited and Grants Holdings Limited were amalgamated to form Grant Hotels, Inc. And you can find that information at the corporate registry, and it was dated and registered in 1998. So we are acquiring this from a company that does not exist. Right? That's what I'm saying to you, that we got to stop doing these rush jobs. Sorry? Repeat. There is no Marriott Barbados Limited currently existing, and it has not been since 1998. That company had been amalgamated with Grant Hotels, Inc. and Marriott Barbados Limited were amalgamated in the 29th of December 1998 to form a company called Grant Hotels, Inc. on amalgamation. So there's no such thing. So we are hearing today that these people do their due diligence and all these professional people and all kind of stuff. But if that was true, this wouldn't have passed those professionals. Unless we are rushing and the professionals are rushing and they're not doing the work properly. In 2016, the government of Barbados acquired those lands, or attempted to acquire those lands, and they started. I don't have a letter from Trotman. I don't have a letter from him. But if you have one, please make it a document of the House. Because I've heard, let's send it to me now. The government has not paid since 2016 for this property. You pay, that's not quite accurate. You pay a piece and a little piece. Under the Land Acquisition Act, if you are not proceeding with an acquisition and you haven't paid for it, the land goes back to who owns it. I don't know if this is the desirable situation that you're looking for, or you don't want to go to that situation, but you need to get involved. I am hearing some things so that it worries me because, as I said, I do not have the facts. And I don't want... Sir? I don't have all the facts. I have a whole set of documents. I don't have all the facts. I know, for one, the documents from the Corporate Affairs Registry, those are facts. I understand that the Prime Minister acted for one of the people who was involved in trying to obtain this property. Did the Prime Minister declare an interest when this matter went to Cabinet? I don't know, because I don't have all the facts. We don't have the time to do the research. Something like this should be passed to the Director of Public Prosecutions for investigations, because sir, could you ask the senators? Stop interrupting me. Whenever I am making a point and it bothers the leader of the Senate, he gets on there real agitated. My problem is that we do not know what we are doing in this respect. You're acquiring from people that don't exist. The land don't belong to who you say that you're getting it from, you know. So first of all, this acquisition, this resolution is a no-go. You cannot acquire, for instance, you cannot acquire $1 million from me. Just that you cannot acquire this property from a company that does not exist. Sir, I think this resolution should be put on the table, and let us do the necessary due diligence, as we always talking about, to make sure that we are doing. But it must be our role when things are wrong. It must be our role. We cannot come to the Senate and say, if the civil servants do something wrong, and we catch it here. I don't know what that letter, Senator Walker. I don't have it. All I am saying to you, sir, is that this should be a non-starter. From the time you have a situation where you are acquiring property from somebody that don't exist, that means that you have not done the work that you were supposed to do before it comes here. Some people might get up and say that I've been incendiary, but I'm not. All I'm saying to you is that the allegations out there does not sound good and look good for Barbados. Right? I mentioned one of them. I'm not even going to mention it again, because some of the people who will be involved in this acquisition and who will benefit from the tourism aspect of it, we're trying to get this property for years. So, are we now saying that government will facilitate its friends however they can by coming in here and using the power of acquisition? We did it once before with the property on Bay Street. I had no difficulty understanding about that property. I had the difficulty the way you did it. But it was seen that government, because of the size of their mandate, they feel that they can do anything and get away with it. This is a non-starter. You need to go back to the drawing board with this acquisition, right? I might even agree to it in the end, but you have to do it right. You have to do it right. You have enough information, Senator Walker, to know that you are in the process of doing an illegality. We should stop. Fix it if you still want to continue, and do it right. Too many things come to this Senate or to this Parliament that you have to go back and fix. And I see the thing is, the last administration has done some terrible things. And you have criticized a lot of them. This administration have criticized a lot of them. But the things that you are not criticizing are the things where you have common friends. This is one of them. You know, when you have fellows who contribute to both, who have a foot in the LP camp and one in the BLP camp, so anytime at all, parties, the government changes, you still have a government in your pocket. This is one such situation. Anything that last administration did, you should regard as suspect and delve into it to make sure that it is correct. Not necessarily, no, don't rush off and do the wrong thing because the body that they were doing it for is also one of your friends. We have a habit now of facilitating our friends. This administration has a habit of facilitating its friends with the power of Parliament. It has to stop. This resolution to acquire land is misplaced, and it needs to be, the further consideration should be postponed until such time as we get this thing right. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. I rise to speak on this resolution to say that I do support the acquisition of the land, but I wish to speak to it more from the perspective of the social impact that these things can have on us. I support the government, as I've said before, pursuing any avenue that can lead to national development and the betterment of our people. However, I do so within the context of an environment in Barbados at this time where there are many persons who are feeling the effects of the social impacts that are taking place in our country and also are living in fear, basically, for the level of violence that has been taking place in recent times. And I want to speak to this resolution from two perspectives. One, for us as small developing states, to pay close attention to what larger states are now looking at very seriously, the problem of over-tourism. Over-tourism. It is a term that has developed within the last few years that speak to the impact of tourism on economies and the general development of states. In fact, in some parts of Europe, there's a call for a ban on Airbnb because of the change that it is bringing about to the social fabric of cities and the countries in general. In Barbados, I believe that we can all accept that tourism is our main driver in this country. But over-tourism is also one of the things that we must pay close attention to. And I do so, I wish to speak to this within the context of the strain on our resources as a people. We already know that we have challenges with our water levels in some areas of this country. We still have problems with sewage. We still have problems with garbage collection, etc. These are all areas under considerable strain, and I'm hearing healthcare as well, sir. These are areas under considerable strain already in our society, and I believe that we need to pay some very, very close attention to how we pursue tourism going forward. In fact, I was reading a study by Bresson and Logasa crowding out effects of cruise tourism on stayover tourism within the Caribbean, a non-parametric panel data evidence. That's from 2008. And what they're suggesting is that even the type of tourism that we pursue can have an impact on national development. Because within our region, the main income earner in terms of tourism is stay-over tourism. But what they're finding now is that cruise tourism is coming in and impacting that in a negative way. So even though we may have more visitors to our islands, it can affect the bottom line in a negative way. And also while still taking a toll on the resources of the country. What has also been mooted is that there is a social impact to over-tourism as well, in the sense that it can affect land prices and prices of rentals, etc. And this can affect the local population and their standard of living. So even though on the national level, we may be earning money, at the community level, people may be under serious strain as a result of tourism. And so I want us to pay close attention to this. While I'm not against the acquisition for tourism purposes, I believe going forward as a nation, this is one of the areas that we must pay very, very close attention to. Because tourism does not occur in a vacuum. Everything we do in this country is linked to something else. And this is where I wish for us to focus on what is possible, the social linkage where tourism is concerned. We've just come out of a year, 2019, where we've had a record number of murders in our society. And into 2020, if you add a few days on to January, probably to the 2nd of February, we've had already 4 murders already for the year, which means that the rate has not changed. So 4 per month, we'll end up at 48 again, or probably even worse. And this can have an impact even on the investment we're making in tourism. Because when persons recognize that our society is changing to the point where they're not safe here anymore, I mean, just down a few yards down the road from where I live, sir, there was a shooting just a few days ago around a gas pump. Around a gas pump. And anyone could have been there at any time, and that bullet could have gone anywhere. And the effects could have been cataclysmic. Catastrophic, sorry. So when we talk of placing our tourism dollars somewhere, I believe that one of the areas we seriously have to pay attention to is national development. Because all the tourists we can attract here, if the mindset of our people is not such that they recognize themselves as citizens of this country and that everything they do can affect what happens to this country, our tourism dollars will be going to waste. And so I want us to pay close attention to national development, the possible effect that crime can have on tourism, but also, in a circular way, how tourism can spur crime.
Yeah.
For this crime can be a spin-off effect as well. And here I want to look at it in the broader context of globalization. I don't think that as small member states, we've paid close enough attention to what globalization does in terms of changing the fabric of societies. In Middle Eastern countries, one of the responses to globalization has been jihad. And what we're now seeing is a counter-response to that, where jihad is leading to a sense of nationalism within the same countries that touted globalization as a great thing. So too that they're now closing their borders and preventing. We are small, vulnerable, open economies. And unless we start paying close attention to the national development of the psyche of our people, all that we do in terms of tourism will mean absolutely nothing to us. Just a few days ago, We observe the 100th anniversary of the birthday of one of our national heroes, Errol Walton Barrow, the Right Excellent. And I understand in April we're paying special attention to yet another national hero, the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams. And I believe that these are two figures that we can use during this year of gathering to once again refocus the national consciousness of our people. Because these are two figures that paid close attention to the national development of this country and to the development of every citizen of this country. At a time like this, when we're beginning to, we're already feeling for the last decade or so the cruel effects of globalization. The fact that all persons and all societies do not develop at the same rate and were not founded upon the same ideologies. I think that we in Barbados must once again discover the soul of our nation. It is only when we discover the soul of our nation that all the other things will fall into place. Because if we continue to develop a generation that sees no sense or has no stake in the development of this nation, all of these things we do with regard to tourism and even national development, and the economy can be running at full steam, it will mean nothing for us. Because our people will have no national consciousness. In fact, one of the first speeches I gave in this chamber, I mentioned the word civics. The understanding of persons that they are citizens of a country, citizens of something, and they all have a responsibility towards the development of this country. It is only when this is inculcated that persons will understand that I cannot shoot around a gas tank no matter what time of day it is, because it can have an effect on the national development of my country. It can have an effect on how my country is perceived. It guides people in how they respond to stimuli. And it will also help us on a national level. Because one of the realities is persons will say, but the young people are only acting up because there are no opportunities for them and the economy is depressed and we went through the, the lost decade and all those other things. That may be true. But we also live in a region where there are natural disasters. When things can happen and it can be nobody's fault. It is then that we have to have the national soul and the character to pull ourselves out of these things and to make our nation great again. That cannot happen unless we focus on national development from the perspective of development of our people. We may have the biggest banks or the fanciest highway, but what if the people are getting worse every day? So my contribution here has just been to caution us about the danger of over-tourism and also to challenge us to focus our attention on where we need to be at this time, and that is developing a national consciousness, because without that, our economy can get better in the next few years. But if the mentality of our people has not changed, if our people's focus and understanding of citizenship has not changed, we'll just be waiting to get back in this position again. With those few words, I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I'm very happy, sir, to be able to support this resolution, which is before this honorable chamber, which speaks to the acquisition of land for housing and tourism purposes. Of course, we are always very happy whenever there are housing solutions being provided. We have heard it said on many occasions that Barbadians want to own a piece of the rock. And therefore, for the government to be pursuing an acquisition which provides housing solutions is very, very important. Maybe, sir, what we need to do is to revisit the type of models that we use with respect to housing. I remember, sir, growing up, little boy, 5, 6 years old, coming home and watching Sesame Street. And many of us in my age group, many of us in my age group, sir, would have grown up watching Sesame Street. And there was a song on Sesame Street which referred to people in the neighborhood. A butcher is a person in the neighborhood. A doctor is a person in the neighborhood. The fireman is a person in the neighborhood. And I reflect on that, sir, because you know what I have observed is that in many villages where you had a community of people, once families started to feel some measure of success, once families got some measure of success, sir, they started to move out and they started to go to the heights and the terraces and to the gardens. And the truth is that I think what happened, sir, is that to a large extent, the more successful persons left, and in communities, we left those who were not as successful. And I made reference to that, and I heard Senator Rogers speaking to the concerns that he has with respect to the manner in which persons function. And I think that when we are looking at housing solutions, maybe we need to look to bring persons of all socio-economic status into the same space so that individuals are able to aspire to things positive. I remember, sir, my great aunt, and she was from St. George, Ellerton. In fact, the priest who conducted her service would have been Senator Reverend Rogers. And she worked as a maid with a judge called Judge Cullimore. And I would remember visiting her, and man, she would have the place set, man, as if it was for royalty. The point is that the same standards that she utilized for Judge Cullimore, she utilized for her family as well. And maybe, sir, what we need to do is to make sure that we get back to some basics. And you know, I am, like Senator Rogers and other senators, worried about the crime situation in the country. But I think part of it relates to a set of people who need attention and who need to know that persons care about them. You know, sir, there are individuals, and I'm coming to Harry Smith, and I'm coming to the whole issue of tourism as well. But I think as you speak of the housing situation, because the reality is this, you know, sir, and I haven't done anything scientific, but I suspect, based on my interaction with persons on the ground, and based on my involvement in different communities, I suspect, sir, that if I was to go to the criminal courts and I was to look at the addresses, I will see that certain communities are more prominent than others. And I'm saying that because you do have to recognize that there can be a relationship, or that there is a relationship between the discussion of housing and the issues related to crime, because there are people who believe, sir, that there are no opportunities for them. Sir, I was in Bush Hall sometime not so long ago. I'm coming back to Harry Smith, but I'm talking about all his housing. I went in, sir, to a community. No, not Bush Hill. No, don't confuse. No, sir, don't confuse. No, sir, don't have. No, sir, don't be confused. Bush Hall. Bush Hall. I am not even so sure where Bush Hill is. Those who would wish to tell me can tell me after I speak in this debate. But I was in Bush Hall, sir, and I saw a youngster. This youngster was about 10 years old. This is about 8 o'clock at night in Bush Hall. And I said to the youngster, listen, it is time for you to be home, man. What you doing out here on the block? And a fella said to me, my grant, you don't understand, man, this is the ghetto. We are sufferers here in the ghetto. There's a perception sometimes that people have that is different, and that they believe that there are no opportunities that exist for them. And I think we have to ensure that even as we look at our housing solutions, we find ways to bring those that are less fortunate along. Sir, with respect specifically to the Harry Smith acquisition and the matters related to tourism, and I heard Senator Rogers speak to the issue of over-tourism, and that is a real issue. It is not an issue in Barbados. The reality is that when you talk about over-tourism, you should immediately conjecture in your mind a situation where visitor rentals, for example, you can't get a car and is overcrowding on the streets. You could also envision a situation where local rents are being pushed up. But that is not the case in Barbados. I'm happy, sir, to know that in Barbados we engage in what I refer to as responsible tourism. And we engage in sustainable development. You are very aware, Mr. President, that there are a number of hotel developments that have been proposed. I'm going to speak, sir, to some of those hotel developments. And the reality is this, though, that when we speak of tourism, there are a number of factors we have to bring into our consciousness. It relates, sir, to airlift. It relates, sir, to the level of accommodation. It relates, sir, to infrastructure and services such as ICT and health services, and it relates as well to having the appropriate and proper legislation. And while I think, sir, that it is important for us to look at conducting a carrying capacity study, because we do have to make sure that we do not develop our industry to such a stage that there are negative impacts. And we do have to look at all of the elements that contribute to providing a good tourism experience. I believe that having an appropriate carrying capacity study is something that is very important. But let me, sir, just speak very briefly to some of the developments that are being undertaken. Presently in Barbados, we have about 5,500 hotel rooms, a little over 5,500 hotel rooms. And there are some developments which the government of Barbados has spoken about, very close to this same Harry Smith development. There is the Sam Lord's Castle proposal with the Wyndham Hotel, a project, sir, which we expect would be starting, well, some aspects of it has already started. There'll be in excess of 400 rooms, and the expectation is that you will have a situation where between 900 and 1,000 people will be employed when that hotel is completed. And I believe that the government of Barbados has signaled that they are prepared to allow another entity to take over that project. We have the Hyatt Ziva. The construction of this hotel, sir, is expected to start within the first 6 months of this year. With the acquisition of the additional land, we will have a further 400 rooms provided there. There's also, sir, the Pierhead Development Project, and that is being facilitated by Neville Isdale, who I believe is the former chairman of and CEO of the Coca-Cola Company. And that is expected to provide a further 184 hotel rooms and 20 residential units. Sir, there's also the Hotel Indigo. And the Hotel Indigo is going in the area of the old Caribbean Hotel. That is going to be a further 170 rooms, and that brand targets the upper mid-scale customer in Barbados. And the hotel, we are expected, will employ between 230 and 250 persons. Of course, sir, there is also the Carlisle House construction. That is being facilitated by an international brand. And the Discovery Bay redevelopment, which is a Royalton project, and that is going to be in excess of 200 rooms. I only reference some of those, sir. Of course, there's the Blue Horizon project that is still, I understand, being discussed. And then the government of Barbados would have signaled development from the area of the Needham's Point Peninsula into through Bay Street and into Bridgetown for further development of hotel rooms. The reality, though, is this, sir. That is not going to happen overnight. I think it is going to happen in a measured and a responsible kind of way. There are very often, or there is very often, I think, a lot of emotion that is centered around new hotel plans. And I want to say this. I believe, sir, that it is important for us to sometimes take a step back and to look at things with a different set of lens. The reality is, sir, and I've said it in this chamber before, no one owes us anything. We have to earn our own way. And the truth is, we have very limited space. So we have to seek to take advantage of the space that we have. And I know our government is looking at facilitating additional stories in a manner that would not have been done before. Of course, sir, there may very well be concerns that relate to density within a particular area and the utilization of the beach area, because we want to make sure that the experience of the visitor and the experience of the locals, that those experiences are very good. Sir, the reason why I believe that there continues to be interest in Barbados as a tourism destination and why we have a number of international brands looking to come here is that Barbados is still seen as a safe, secure destination, and there is significant potential for growth and potential for development. As it relates, sir, to the performance, in December, the internal surveys undertaken by the BHTA show that we have a little less than a 1% decline in occupancy for December. But the reports of the STR, the Smith Travel Research, shows that we have a little under a 1% growth in tourism in occupancy numbers. So I think based on the information that we have, we can safely say that we have performed in December 2019 as good as we performed in December 2018. We do recognize that there are some challenges on the horizon. The certainty of Brexit has brought with it some measure of uncertainty as well. The reality is, I have seen recently that there has been an increase in the value of the pound. I didn't look today to see what the position is, but there had been some measure of increase in the pound. But what we are saying, sir, is that persons are a lot more cautious as to how they spend money. And You know, in the past, you had a family that would come and stay on the West Coast, a family that would come and stay in a villa, and you would have husband, wife, parents, children, grandchildren, everybody would come and they would spend 2 weeks. Now what is happening is that the numbers are decreasing, so you're getting sometimes the husband and wife with the children, the grandparents are not coming, and they're not spending as long. The truth is that that has an impact on our overall revenues. So we have to start looking at our revenues, and we have to start being very scientific in the approach that we take to the development of the industry. I am happy, sir, to have been involved in some discussions with the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc., where we met with an entity that could provide us with some critical information in terms of marketing Barbados. I know sometimes, sir, and I know sometimes, sir, that we hear persons say that they go to New York, for example, and they see ads of other countries in the region, but they don't see Barbados. The truth is that the question has to be asked is, on the particular station, does it fit the particular profile of a Barbadian visitor? And that is critical. And I believe, sir, that it is important for the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. to continue to, in a very strategic and scientific way, focus on what they have to get done. Sir, you know, there are a number of other things with respect to the tourism industry that I can speak to, but I know that there are a number of other speakers today. I know that the leader of government business, would like those other persons to be able to speak. I did indicate that there are some concerns. We have a situation where from April, JetBlue will no longer be flying out of Fort Lauderdale. That is a situation I know that is that has the attention of the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. There's also a situation where American Airlines is predominantly having 2 flights coming out of Miami on mornings instead of 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. It does change a bit over the winter period, but that is not for a long period, and that is not now what is permanently on the schedule. That has implications because, sir, a visitor coming from the West Coast will now have to overnight in Miami to get into Barbados, and when they leave Barbados to go back to the West Coast, they have to also overnight. So those are some issues that we're looking at, but Barbados, sir, still continues to attract significant visitor numbers, and I know that the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. is aggressively looking at how they can strategically market in the different source markets. Sir, I would want to say as well that there are some emerging markets, and Ireland certainly is one of those markets. In September, we had a Taste of Barbados roadshow that went to Ireland and Scotland. Sir, in March, the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. is proposing to have a specific roadshow that focuses, sir, on Ireland. And I was looking, sir, for those dates. Those dates are from March 10th to 13th. And the roadshow, sir, will focus on Belfast, Galway, Cork, and Kildare. While the BTMI is looking, sir, at ensuring that we continue to engage in the necessary marketing actions in the established source markets. At the same time, they're also looking, sir, to expand in new markets as well. Sir, I believe that what I have said essentially signals that Barbados continues to perform well, and the expectation is that 2020 we will continue to welcome significant number of visitors to Barbados, and we will continue to collaborate together to ensure that the visitor experience is one that is exceptional. Therefore, sir, with those words, I wish to give my support to this resolution, as I believe that it is an important resolution for taking Barbados forward. I thank you, sir.
Senator Grant. Thank you for your contribution, Senator Grant. I recognize Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I rise to give my support to this resolution. I think any resolution which sets out in one area to acquire land to provide housing development for our citizens is a very important one. We know the significant pressures which is brought to bear on the government to be able to provide housing and land for the many families who have been unable to acquire a piece of this land, and to be able to help to support and to provide for their family. So I think that this acquisition is an important one. Not sure, Mr. Deputy President, if this is in any way connected to the Rock Hall situation, if any of this land will be used to do any reciting or any other matters relating to that. But I thought I would just mention it because I would hope that it doesn't, because I would not like to see us setting a precedent, in this situation. But it is mentioned because I don't know. I just don't know what the purpose of the housing development is. And just also in comment to an issue which was raised in terms of overdevelopment by Senator Rogers. Very important one, I think, Mr. Deputy President, because to me, over-tourism signals some of the issues which Senator Grant raised, but I also want particularly to let us recognize that there can be significant environmental issues. Even if you look at things, for example, like the overuse of Harrison's Cave, the overuse of our beaches. We have seen in the press over the last few weeks, how the various vendors and the hotel operators seem to be jockeying for positions on the beach to put up their beach umbrellas and their beach chairs. And so all of those issues, I think, at some point has to be taken into consideration to ensure that we can preserve the environment and not let it be overused because of the tourism projects. But Mr. Deputy President, my main issue is to just raise a few issues which I think are worthy of consideration relating to the Acquisition Act. For example, Mr. Deputy President, when I look at the Act, I notice it permits government to acquire land for public purposes, obviously. But what I don't see is a definition of public purpose. So it seems to me the relevant, either through the cabinet or through the relevant government ministry, tends to determine what that public purpose is. And usually, and in most cases, invariably, it is a fairly straightforward acquiring land for school, acquiring lands for playgrounds, hospitals, and so on. So not usually a big issue. But I would like to suggest that the Act itself could be brought more up to date by having in the Act a definition of a public purpose, so that there is more transparency when we see these type of acquisitions coming before Parliament for approval. We know that we know exactly what that public purpose is, and we can relate to it or disagree with it as the case may be. I also want to suggest, Mr. Deputy President, that obviously the acquisition, and I think in the Act itself, speaks to the question of fair price, which we know as market price. So, between a willing seller and buyer, etc., etc. But the Act itself actually allows government to assume that the land is agricultural land, unless otherwise proven not to be so. And so I think you can have a situation where government decides to acquire land, and because government assumes, because the chief land surveyor assumes under the Act that is agricultural land, it becomes valued at an agricultural value, which can be far from wrong. And this means that the transaction can be long and drawn out, because obviously if the owner decides to contest the value which is being paid, you end up could be long extended court hearings before this matter can be resolved. And so I think, again, that can be tightened up in the Act. And I recall, for example, perhaps just a few months ago, reading in the press where the relative of a person whose land had been compulsory acquired was lamenting the fact that it was several years had elapsed. They had only now gotten the proceeds and settled, but the owner had long since had died. And so they were never able to enjoy the proceeds from that acquisition. And so I think that it may also be a useful thing if some sort of timeline, some sort of deadline be placed. Obviously, we know that there will be some situations where it won't work, particularly if an owner is contesting the value being paid for the price being paid for the land, and it has to go through court, and there can't be any agreement between, and there's difficulty in the government and the owner agreeing. It can be exceedingly low. We know there could be situations, but in normal situations where an owner has decided, okay, there's no issue in terms of the valuation, I think there should be some sort of timeline to ensure that these transactions are wrapped up and the owner is allowed to enjoy those proceeds in short order. I also would like to suggest in reviewing the Act that perhaps a more modern concept of dealing with valuation be put into the Act. And I am thinking where you have a situation whereby instead of the constant the differences between government and the owner, perhaps you can have an independent valuer other than the chief surveyor, who would put an independent valuation on the property. And that, I think, would probably also help to alleviate the long period of time in terms of coming to a proper value. The other concept, and which I just want to throw up briefly as well, is the concept of future value, which the Act does not permit to be considered in valuing the land. So, for example, an investor, you buy a piece of land, you hold it with the intent of doing some future investment where the value of the property is expected to increase and you are expected to generate some significant amount of income from that investment. The Act does not allow that to be taken into account, and therefore you would only be compensated with the present market. And I put this situation a little further because you could stretch it to consider, for example, an investor who has put in an application to the Town and Country Planning Department. So the application is in, or even it may have been approved, but the development hasn't started. And obviously, a development such as that, which may have been approved by town planning, can have a significant impact on the value of the land. And therefore, I would suggest again that some consideration could be given in looking at that investment and how it would have been or could have been used in the future. In the UK, incidentally, in the UK, that is actually allowed to be taken into account in valuing these acquisitions. So I would just throw that out for what is worth. But Mr. Deputy President, as I said, I support this resolution. I'm hoping that the housing project will go somewhere in alleviating some of the pressures to provide housing solutions for our people, and that as we move ahead, we can see some way of tweaking the Act to ensure that when an acquisition is done, the whole process of the transaction can be more timely so that all the persons involved can benefit from the acquisition. So with those few points, Mr. Deputy President, I'm obliged to.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I rise this afternoon to speak to the resolution before us as it relates to the acquisition of the parcel of land property owned by, which is now in contention, but nonetheless, that is what the resolution states, Marriott Barbados Corporation Limited in St. Philip. And so I want to speak, as others have done, in relation to, one, residential housing and tourism development. And I'll start first with residential housing, Mr. Deputy President. Sir, as we move people or citizens or persons who reside in Barbados to more rural areas, those areas then become urbanized, more or less. And I am just a little weary that there are some things we're not taking into consideration when we go about these new housing developments. One clear area that we can look at is that of transportation, the access to efficient, adequate public transportation, Mr. Deputy President. I believe that in some areas of St. Philip at the moment, there is clearly the lack of availability of service to some areas in St. Philip, if not the majority. The other thing I think government could possibly look at in terms of new residential housing is it is an opportunity to pilot some recyclable projects in those areas so that we reduce the waste that's going to the landfill. I think if government can come up with some recycling projects for these new development areas, that is something that could be lauded. Another area of opportunity for some of these new developments is greater access to renewable energy on some of these houses, either at the household level or at the community level. If you're going to erect new developments, I think it has to be in a holistic manner. And you have to then tie it to some of your energy targets and energy goals that you have. So I think now that we have the new feed-in tariff rates, that is something that the government can also possibly look into. Sir, another area which I think is an area for opportunity for the government is that of mainstreaming rainwater harvesting for potable use. It would obviously need the right regulation and monitoring. However, I think with Barbados clearly becoming more drier because of climate variability and also in the long run because of climate change, the increase in drought, which has an impact on our groundwater supply, the mainstreaming of rainwater harvesting then is something that in these new developments could be something that we look to, as I said, mainstream. And so I say that on the backdrop, being cognizant that government has identified or has rather put out a request for proposal for climate resilient housing design. And I noted that a lot of the emphasis has been on roofs, and that is commendable. But I think these other areas in terms of recycling, renewable energy, and rainwater harvesting are also areas that we can speak to as it relates to new housing developments. The other issue that I want to speak to as it relates to development, planning development and housing, is when you move persons into an area, commercial entities also follow. We now have a very large construction going up in the area of 6 roads. We now also see the erection of the retail and wholesale commercial property at the top of Kendall Hill, which I'm assuming is going to service a lot of the southeast of the island. When that also happens, it means there's greater demand for the use of water, the use of energy, and I am not sufficiently comfortable that we are paying enough attention to the strain on resources and the pace of development going forward, Mr. Deputy President. As I said, we have the opportunity at the moment with these new housing developments to look at these areas in a more holistic way. And I really hope that government looks at these areas in a manner where the technical aspects of it are sound, and we have the opportunity to build housing areas that are reflective of where we want to go rather than where we're coming from. So, sir, that is my 2 cents, more or less, on housing. I move to now tourism development. It appears that the current administration is following in the footsteps of all of the others that went before it in the last 20 to 25 years, where we are hinging the economy or the growth of the economy on tourism, and more so in the short run on the construction of tourism accommodation. Tourism accommodation is a long-term investment, and I would have to say that once these structures have been given the permission to be erected, that property is locked in for about 20 years because they're looking for a long-term return on investment, Mr. Deputy President. And I am conscious that, as Senator Grant raised the point, that land is a scarce commodity here in Barbados. And are we sure, in terms of the share by which we're allocating to things like residential housing, tourism accommodation, agriculture, manufacturing, that we are maximizing the utility of our space for the betterment of the country? Sir, there are a number of projects, and Senator Grant, who is all things tourism, went through a list of them. There is the Haywoods project that I believe is now stalled, and we haven't heard much on the progress or what is happening with those negotiations in St. Peter, that St. Peter property. Then we have the Carlisle Bay investment, which every time we speak about it, it seems to be increasing in size. We started at 238, I believe. We went to 350, and I think today I heard 400, more or less. And so that property is going to be on the doorstep of Carlisle Bay Marine Park and will have, I am sure, environmental impacts on that area. Then, sir, you have the 418-room project in St. Philip, which has also stalled. And we haven't heard as it relates to where those negotiations are. Not sandals. Right. Good. So, sir, as I talk about these stalled projects or projects that are clearly hard to get off the ground, and the one at Bats Rock, I'm being reminded, I am troubled by how we are utilizing our space and what we're giving permission, how we're giving permission to utilize space in Barbados as it relates to tourism accommodation. And it cannot necessarily fall on government to follow through because these are private sector driven projects. But I'm wondering if there has been any assessment of the current stock of accommodation here in Barbados and how it's being used, and how many vacant and derelict properties as it relates to the proportion of tourism accommodation in Barbados. Because then that gives you a truer picture of the real state of affairs as it relates to how much land is actually being used in Barbados for tourism and the utilization of it. And I say that because I've also heard from government that there is this plan to redevelop Bay Street and have properties along the coastline in that area, and that concerns me greatly, Mr. Deputy President. Because if at the moment, as Senator Rogers mentioned, we have a significant strain on resources as it relates to things like water and sewage, how are we accommodating for this further development on our coastline where many of the natural assets in the marine space are already at risk or dead? What also concerns me is that we are not hearing sufficiently either of the projected demand to satisfy all of the supply that we are creating. Because if you're saying to me you're building these hotels, you're building this accommodation, that means that there's significant demand from outside to justify things like the compulsory acquisition that is before us for tourism development in Barbados. So I want to move on now to the second part of that conversation about tourism development. The central bank's latest report for the year 2019, tourism grew by 3%, and it was recorded as the 5th consecutive year the sector experienced growth. And that, I'm sure, is good news for those in the sector. But sir, when you look at all the other sectors, and when you look at the real GDP growth rate, which is 0.1%, so the economy contracted last year, negative 0.1%, negative 0.1%. The economy contracted last year despite the 3% increase in the tourism sector. And so you could actually or almost say that it appears as though the tourism sector is operating in isolation. Because clearly the economic activity that is happening in the tourism sector is not sufficient enough, it is not significant enough to have spillover effects to the other areas of our economy. And sir, what troubles me even more is that we do not even understand or know with any certainty of degree how the sectors are linked from a dollar value basis, because we do not have the input-output data or the supply and use tables to understand the intermediary demand that goes through the system. So there's no sound analysis or that I know of that has been done recently from a structural perspective as it relates to Barbados' sectors for us to understand those linkages or lack thereof. But Mr. Deputy President, that is at the macro level. At the micro level, there is also something happening. There seems to be, as you walk around Barbados, this amalgamation, this concentration of resources and capital in the tourism sector. What am I talking about? It seems as though, particularly for tour operators and transportation, as it relates to taxis, there are these small groupings of individuals who have taken over the market. These tour operators are now moving tourists from their hotels and ships across the island to specific restaurants, specific beaches, and now tourists seem to be engaging in a pre-arranged experience of Barbados rather than one that is a little more organic in nature. And I talk about that because if you have a tourism sector that is growing at 3%, but the inequality in the sector is also increasing, we have a problem, Mr. Deputy President. You cannot have a sector where a few are monopolizing the profits and you're marginalizing small entrepreneurs, taxi operators, small restaurants. Because what you'll have now is a widening of the haves and the have-nots in this country. And I really, really want us to pay greater attention, Mr. Deputy President. I want us to pay greater attention, sir, to this widening that appears to be happening, because I don't have the facts to back up what I'm saying. Is off of observation. Observation. I'll get to it. Don't worry. Observation. If you're saying to me that the tour operators are booking from online, yeah? And you're saying the taxi operators here have to wait until the tourists get here, it is government's role in protecting those small businesses and small players if a solution can be made where an app is developed, an online platform is developed, where those small taxi operators and other small players in the industry can go online, register, and payments can be made to them directly, that is the role in which government should be playing to ensure you protect your small players in industries. But that is one possible solution. Sir, the distribution of income, and this is on to the point of inequality, that is something that is somewhat playing out in the tourism sector. But when you look around Barbados, and I said this when the government first brought the austerity program, there is, or it appears to be, there seems to be these pockets of poverty and persons who are unable to provide for themselves popping up around Barbados. Sir, based on the UNDP's Human Development Report in 2019, Barbados had a HDI, Human Development Index value, of 0.813. The index ranges from 0 to 1, 1 being the highest, the better rating. Barbados, based on that 0.813 value, is considered a very high human development, is in a very high human development category. However, that index does not account for inequality, Mr. Deputy President. When you account for inequality in the Barbadian context, the HDI actually falls from 0.813 to 0.675, a loss of 17%. That is mainly driven by income inequality, which is at 33.6% in Barbados. The average in very high development countries is 19%. Barbados is at 33.6%. Sir, when I tried to look for data as it relates to poverty and income distribution in Barbados, the data is actually simply not there, at least in the public domain. If we are going through an austerity program and government is attempting to revitalize the economy, I would like us to pay greater attention to how income is being distributed in Barbados. Because as the senator who sits next to me, Reverend Rogers, noted, you have to pay attention to the social fabric of your society. The social fabric of your society. Because in my own experience, as I said, when I walk around or when I interact with persons now, you go into certain areas, you're seeing persons begging where you've never seen before. You're seeing people ask for help. You see people asking for food. That was something that happened recently in my neighborhood. I've never seen it. I have never seen it before. Where you have individuals walking through neighborhoods asking for a bit of your Sunday food and coming to tears. Don't worry, Mr. Deputy President. I assisted the individual. Be your brother's keeper. But nonetheless, I really, really think that we have to pay very close attention to what is happening in our society. Mr. Deputy President. And I think that at bare minimum, we have to construct social policies that address a lot of these ills. That is fine, to address a lot of these ills, because as we move forward and try to address clean energy, climate action, There's also the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 10, which speaks to reducing inequalities. So as government marches ahead and seeks growth, I'd like to make sure that everyone has at least the opportunity.
Mr. Deputy President, if I could just, I'm very, very sorry. I must, a point of elucidation, if I could, sir. I'm very, 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 very sorry, sir.
Mr. President, he has to stop this. He cannot
Very sorry. I raise on a point of elucidation, Mr. Deputy President, only to say that the
Point of
minister.
order, sir. He cannot elucidate her speech. You have to rule him out of order. He is bad behaved. He does not know how to behave. She is speaking. He has to get up and interrupt her. So he has to get a point of elucidation. He cannot elucidate her speech. Only she can.
Exactly. You cannot.
He is breaking the rules of the Senate. He has to sit down and behave himself in here.
Mr. Deputy President, I am guided by you.
Rule against him.
And the standing orders that exist in this honorable chamber. Sir, as I said when I first stood up, I didn't want to interfere in terms of the speech, but just to make the point, sir, that the Minister of Tourism has clearly articulated that as it relates to...
Point of order, sir. Sir, will you please rule on my point of order? He cannot elucidate her speech. And he's so bad behaved. No, I'm on a point where he won't sit down. Sir, and he's been encouraged by the leader of the government business, you know. He cannot elucidate her speech, and he certainly cannot elucidate the speech of the Minister of Tourism. Minister of Tourism, he's out of order. Rule him out of order.
Mr. Deputy President, I'm guided by you, sir. I am most respectful of the chair. I'm most respectful of honorable senators as well. And I just wanted to make the point, sir.
Mr. Deputy President, please rule on my point of order. I'm on a point of order. You have not ruled on it, and I am not sitting down here and let him abuse her privilege or anybody else's privilege inside here. He is out of order. He cannot elucidate a speech of another member, and he certainly cannot elucidate the speech of a member of the other place. He is out of order.
Thank you, Mr. President, sir. The Minister of Tourism would have already communicated that as it relates to the Bridgetown Port, that there will be opportunities for taximen. I am aware, sir, that the taxi operators are going to the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association meetings and meeting with operators. And the Minister
I must
of
insist
Tourism
that you rule on my point of order. That is not a point of order.
Also communicated. As also communicated, sir.
But this partisan chairmanship must stop, sir.
Has also communicated, sir, that as it relates to the Grantley Adams International Airport, that there will be opportunities for small operators as well. Thank you, sir.
I don't want nothing from you, idiot. He gets chance at me. Which chance he get at me? I'm not one of those schoolgirls.
Sir,
What chance he get at me?
I am just, in my contribution, echoing what I have heard on the ground, what I've read in the newspaper. People in the tourism sector, small players, have indicated they feel as though they're being pushed out of the sector. And with that, given that there's so much contention clearly in the House, I would like us to quickly move on to lunch. So with those words, I am obliged
And he referred, Mr. President, to his experiences in the night and going outside to seek relief. And he spoke with reference to moving to better housing which government had provided. And this bill, this acquisition resolution seeks to move people, hopefully, from circumstances that are not as good to a better environment. He commented on the need to make sure that affordable housing is not cheap housing, and that efforts to move persons into better environments are not, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, met with poor quality housing. And it's important, Mr. President, that when government embarks on the various housing projects, that due consideration is given to those who will potentially inherit those houses at a later time. Now, Mr. President, all that happens in this country is linked together. And I worked yesterday, a very long day in our major healthcare institution, and despite all the shortages of nurses, I was able to complete an operating list because a nurse whose shift had finished chose to stay on from a different operating room to come and finish the list that I was doing. And that sort of behavior is to be commended. And I have wondered, Mr. President, if when government seeks to resolve the problems that we have with our nurses and questions why do our nurses leave, whether housing is an issue, and if there is any way or any provision for government to look at special access. Because a young nurse who is going to spend 25 to 30 years in a profession needs to have some assurance that when she reaches the age of retirement, she is not living in her mother's house. And maybe the time has come for government to be preemptive and look at solutions other than just salaries. I am sure that my colleague, Senator Walcott, will be able to advise on such matters. Mr. President, I don't normally respond to asides, but on this occasion, I will encourage my colleague to look after his 110 in St. Lucia. Now, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, you are preempting me, but I will get to it. We have essential services in this country, and those persons are required to be available 365 days in a year or 366 in a leap year. And I've had the recurrent experience of going into District A police station, and I purposely mentioned the police station, early in the morning or at lunchtime, and I've seen our hard-working policemen who are based at that station fly down like birds from the trees to a van to get their lunches. And I've asked repeatedly, why is this? How can we have the essential services in this country, and we have not provided the people who have to work 24 hours a day in shifts, no matter what the conditions are out there, whether it's a hurricane, earthquake, or sunny weather? Why are we not providing the facilities for them? Why is it that after all of these years, policemen, in this particular instance, should be seeking to get food from a van that drives in? Why do they not have a canteen in the largest facility in the country? And Mr. President, I am hearing utterances on the other side that there is a canteen. But as far as I am aware, there is no canteen at the largest police station. And the largest station is Mr. President, at District A in Station Hill. So, some of these problems, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, have easy solutions, and maybe government needs to sit down with the people who are in these services and fix some of them. Now, Mr. President, the resolution seeks to acquire property in St. Philip that is connected to a beach. And beaches have been part of our existence, I believe, from the time we were here. We came and found them, as Senator Walker has just said, and we will go and leave them. But while we are here, all of us should be able to access them and enjoy them. And Mr. President, I am calling on the government to please make sure that the rights of our citizens and visitors equally to access our beaches as they grow, are not eroded. That they're not eroded. Mr. President, as a child growing up, I used to be chased into the sea by dogs owned by persons who lived on the beach, and you had to retreat into the sea. You might have had similar experiences, Mr. Deputy President. We are in danger, Mr. President, of such times returning in a different form. And it's important, Mr. President, that we make sure that our beaches are accessible for all. Not only for those who lie on umbrellas, lie under umbrellas and chairs, but for all. Now, my colleague, Senator Drakes, spoke about development, housing development and energy. And I know that her level of thinking confuses some, but Senator Drakes, rest assured that you're heard. Mr. Deputy President, the issue of green energy, renewable energy, and particular solar energy is taken off in Barbados at tremendous pace. But government needs to make sure that it is not abused by some. Mr. President, there are sections of this country, if you go on Google Earth and look at photographs and the colors of the roofs, particularly the large buildings, you will note that they're all black. And we know that to have a safe and sustainable grid, we cannot have more than a percentage of the energy being produced by small producers. If any particular group produces or moves into parishes and takes up that quota, it eliminates the possibility for small household owners from benefiting. And it's being done. It's being done in front of our eyes, and nobody's saying anything. So I am saying something, Mr. President. I am speaking about it, Mr. President. If we allow the large persons to take up all the space on the grid, the small homeowner cannot benefit. And it's happening. So I call upon the government to look into it. Mr. President, or housing stock generally is not as good as we would like it to be. And when we look at what happened in our other Caribbean islands, what happened to our sisters and brothers in those islands, we cannot say that it is not inevitable that the same will happen here. And when we build, particularly when we build what some people call middle income housing, we have to make sure that we build it in places that it does not flood, that the sea will not come in and take the houses, and we also have to make sure that they have a certain amount of wind resistance. And while government has done many housing developments, I'm asking, Mr. President, that we make sure that the standards which we have set when people are given contracts are adhered to. So that when a contractor is given a contract to build a house of a certain specification that has a certain hurricane rating, if there is such, that is what is produced. And we should not enter into producing affordable but cheap housing that when the wind blows higher than normal, the roof will blow off. Or people will have to feel unsafe in the house that they've put all of their money into. If we're going to do it, Mr. President, we have to do it well. But I think the idea, Mr. President, that you would be bold enough, government would be bold enough to put a new housing development next to a tourism development is a really good one. It says that it cannot be horrible, and people, usually when they're exposed, will aspire to do something differently. And maybe what is being done here will be viewed in a few years as the example that we should all follow. Mr. President, it has my full blessing. And I'm obliged to you.
And now with a short intervention, Senator Springer will take us to lunch, I believe.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, I rise this afternoon with somewhat of a heavy heart, which is in direct contrast to how I felt this morning when I entered this honorable chamber. I had received some good news. I saw a friend I haven't seen in a long time, and I was happy. But having come here this morning, Mr. President, I experienced what was perhaps the most reckless display of irresponsible speech that I've ever heard in this honorable chamber, Mr. Deputy President. We're, for the purpose of, responding to an aside that our national security was placed in peril, just to score political points to an utterance that we shouldn't even be hearing. And that honorable senators could come in here and be so reckless, so irresponsible. that they will say something like that, Mr. Deputy President, it really put a damper on my afternoon. And I'm not one to cite scripture, Bible scripture, Mr. President, but I've done it before. Now I'll do it again for the benefit of the good senator down that side. And I use the word down purposely because he's taken this honorable chamber down into the gutter with those kinds of remarks and comments that he comes in here every so often and make. And I would encourage the honorable senator just to, if you have some free time, to read Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18, where it states that thoughtless words can wound as deeply as any sword, but wisely spoken words can heal. Now we encourage the honorable senator to thoughtless words can wound as deeply as any sword, but wisely spoken words can heal. And that is, and Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18, just when you get some time, just take a read. But continue. But this afternoon, Mr. President, I raised to lend my voice in support to this resolution to compulsory acquire land in St. Philip for the purpose of housing and tourism development. Mr. Deputy President, housing and perhaps the investment in a house is, in many cases, the biggest investment that a person will make in their lifetime. The biggest investment that a person will make in their lifetime. And there's a certain sense of security, a sense of satisfaction, a sense of happiness that one gets when one acquires their own home or their own house. But for many years in Barbados, it has been difficult. It's been difficult for poor people to own a house in this country for a long time. So this particular resolution is a step in a direction of addressing that increased demand for housing. Because demand for housing has increased. And it has increased for poor people. And as I said before, there's a reason why it's difficult for poor people to own a house. Firstly, it's difficult to get a loan or a mortgage if you're poor. To buy the land. Land is expensive in this country. It's difficult to build a house. It's difficult to pay for labor. I remember about 12 or 15 years ago, Mr. Deputy President, I was working on my home. And I hired a mason. And he was charging me $150 a day for labor. And I was working for $125 a day. And he brought with him a steel bender and a laborer, both of whom I had to pay $75 a day. So I was paying $300 a day and working for $125 a day. So it's hard. It's difficult. You understand? It was difficult. So it's difficult for poor people to build a house. So you see houses in this country, you see them, they're rotten, they're dilapidated, and you ask why it is that person living in a house. Sometimes you have 2, 3 brothers living in a house, siblings living in a house, and the house is still, as we say, rotting down. It's because it's difficult for persons to raise the large amount of money that is needed to repair a house. You cannot take it $3,000 or $4,000, say you're going to repair a house in Barbados, especially a board house. Because if you start to remove one board, you might find 10 rotten ones underneath there. And then you have for yourself spending an extra $10,000. And some people don't have that $10,000 or $15,000 to spend up front. So that's why you find that a lot of people stay in houses until the houses are falling down around them. Let me move on, Mr. President. But that is a reality. So for government to provide housing solutions for persons, believe me, it's something that is necessary, it's relevant, and it's welcome. And I support it wholeheartedly. Mr. President, Deputy President, I cannot come into this honorable chamber and don't talk about housing situation in St. Andrew. Because in St. Andrew, we have a unique challenge that is not shared by persons in other parts of Barbados. All over Barbados, we have overcrowding in houses. We have houses that are in a dilapidated state. We have houses that don't have proper access, but based on roads don't have proper access to the houses. We have those issues. Those issues that exist across Barbados. And we have all that in St. Andrew, but what we have that is unique to us is that we have land slippage. You may have a situation living in St. Andrew where your house, where you invested all your money, you invested all your energy, your effort, all your memories can just slip away down into the gully. And that happens in St. Andrew. I don't know if it happens in St. Thomas, where you're from. I imagine it could, because part of St. Thomas, part of the Scotland district is in St. Thomas, but it happens in St. Andrew. It has happened. There's an entire community that it's happened to in Whitehill. I would talk about it. It's happened. So we have a unique problem in St. Andrew, so, which is unique to us. That's all right. I live in Barbados, and I would speak for the benefit of poor people in this country, Mr. Deputy President. So I just wanted to make the point that housing solutions is an issue in Barbados. It's something that a lot of Barbadians are struggling to come to grips with, and it's something that I'm glad to see this government is moving towards addressing. But going forward, Mr. Deputy President, I have just a few suggestions. I would have listened to the honorable senators who would have spoken before. No. I mean, the Honorable Senator Drakes, Honorable Senator Maynard. I would have listened to it. I took some notes. And I believe going forward, as mentioned by Senator Drakes, housing developments should have, there's certain basic amenities that each housing development should have, and housing development should have access to renewable energy. I said it here before. I see no reason why every house should have photovoltaic panels, solar panels on the roof to offset the energy requirements of that particular house. These are things that we can look at. Yes, it will cost a lot up front, but 10, 15, 20 years down the road, it will pay off. Also, Mr. President, as I look at future building, I visited, I think it was last week, a ship. It came here from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. A ship came down here from the States. That's a administration, a vessel based in the States called, I think it was the Ronald Brown. And they were doing some studies here on how temperatures in the ocean impact the clouds. And one of the reasons they came was because they realized there's some correlation between rising temperatures in the ocean and the strength and ferocity of the hurricanes that we have been that we have seen. All right, and our Prime Minister has been on. She has made the point on numerous occasions that Barbados and small island states like Barbados in the Caribbean are on the front line of climate change, and I found it quite interesting that we will have. Some of the major countries, I think the French were here, the Germans were here, the British were here, and the Americans were here, all working together to try to understand what was the cause, what's the reason for these increase in terms of these hurricanes that we're now seeing impacting the Caribbean. We were seeing Category 5 plus Category 6 hurricanes impacting the Caribbean. So when we build in, as Senator Maynard would have alluded to, we have to take into consideration in our building plans the building to sustain our homes, that they can sustain a Category 5 hurricane. They say it's impossible, but we have to relook our building code because those kind of hurricanes are impacting the region. We mean 6, 5 plus 6. We know that the climate is changing. There's been climate change. We've seen the evidence. And if you're not familiar with the bleaching of the reefs, at least you can see the ferocity of the hurricanes. And this is something that we cannot take lightly. And I heard just the other day that we are due. There was an earthquake there off the coast of Jamaica, and they said that the region is due, long overdue. I think they said, yes, a catastrophic earthquake. I don't know where they got that idea from, but that's what they said. Yes, and with earthquakes, sometimes a tsunami follows. So these are things that we have to take into consideration as we build. You know?
That's when we move the fire station.
Exactly. We're gonna have some surge coming into Bridgetown, and our fire station is underwater. You see, our prime minister is forward thinking, a forward thinking prime minister, forward thinking government. Some people may not necessarily understand that because that is above some people's ability to think. I'm not referring to you in this case, Mr. Senator Franklin. I'm just making the point that these are things that we are considering going forward, and the Prime Minister would have spoken to these things already publicly, so we know where the thinking is. But just want to make one last point before I come back to this particular resolution. In terms of housing development, there is a small segment in our society, Mr. Deputy President, that is often overlooked. A small group of persons, those persons with disabilities, sensory disabilities, people hard of hearing, people who have, I just use that for example. My focus is on persons who are visually impaired. Me and myself, yes? Very often we don't take into consideration when we are building out these developments, persons who may be visually impaired. We have worked towards ensuring that persons who are wheelchair bound have access to these homes, and it's something that I think that we should look at. Every development should have a ramp or some form of access for persons with disabilities, those who are confined to a wheelchair, but also those persons with visual problems, who are visually impaired. We must also take those persons into consideration as well, and make certain accommodations for those persons. I don't think enough in the past has been done to accommodate these people, and it's something that we can look at going forward. All right? So I will just end by saying that, Mr. Deputy President, I support this resolution. I support it because it assists a large segment of our population. People who share a reality that some senators in here would never be able to understand because they don't share our reality. Persons who are not in a position to walk around with large envelopes full of money. Persons who...
You mean for the union?
Not only that, you know, persons that when relief of their money, persons could get $800 or $900 from them easily. No, they don't share the reality of average poor person in this country who can hardly afford to repair a house, far less build a house or buy a house. So this resolution to acquire these lands, to provide housing for persons in Barbados is a step in the direction of fixing one of the social problems that many people in Barbados face. I was going to go on to speak about another issue that impacted St. Andrew, but I'm gonna wrap it up there. Well, I'm being encouraged by my colleagues at in the Honorable Chamber. Mr. Deputy President, I've lived in rural Barbados all my life. All my life. Never live in town. I know the culture as it exists, the housing may be slightly different. If you're in town, there are many crowded areas. Persons tend to want to move out to these urban spaces, and if they can, get into Heights of Terrace. If they can, they get into some place in the country, St. James, St. Thomas, one of those more central parishes, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Yeah? But if you're from St. Andrew, or you're from St. Thomas, or from St. Joseph, in the country, sometimes for us, when we think about housing, we don't want to leave St. James or St. Andrew to go and live in St. Michael or anywhere like that. We don't want to leave. We want to stay within the constituency, within the area. We like the idea of being close to home. That's something and if you were to travel to St. Andrew, you understand why persons would not want to leave St. Andrew. No, just take the scenery, yeah, the landscape, the people. You wouldn't want to leave. And under the last administration, the last BLP administration, there was a land bank that was set up where land was earmarked for recycling of people from White Hill and other parts of Hillaby, where we would have suffered some land slippage. Yes? And we've seen that particular land that was earmarked for persons within the constituency, so persons would still be close to where they would have recited from. Because if you think about it, Orange Hill is just down the road from Hillaby, it's just down the road from White Hill. But we saw that land go into commercial use under the previous administration. So this I think, the acquisition of this land for residential.
You mean Chevette?
Yeah.
That was residential land?
It was earmarked. And see, so the acquisition of this land is more or less a balancing out of that. You bring now this and other acquisitions, you bring land now in for residential use. So persons such as those persons who were displaced in St. Andrew and other parts of Barbados, St. Philip or St. Lucie or where have you, would now have some place that they can build their house, or they can buy their house, and they can experience the Barbadian dream, Barbadian goal to own a little piece of the rock. And with those few words, Mr. Deputy President, I fully support this resolution, and I'm obliged.
Senator Moore.
Mr. Deputy President, first of all, let me just thank everyone for their contribution to this debate. I think it's been well articulated, so I won't go into too much detail in my wrap-up, just to say briefly that, as I did mention originally, that there is a demand for housing. We're all cognizant and aware of it. And as a responsible government, one has to always ensure that issues of housing are not ignored, and that people have the opportunity to be accommodated, no pun intended. And certainly, as has been said by some of my colleagues in here, we cannot have all the housing in one area. And as I think Senator Springer very adeptly spoke about, people who live in an area such as St. Andrew or St. Philip or St. Thomas or even Paynes Bay, even St. James, they may wish to remain in the area that they are most used to and not necessarily run to some urban area. And as we know, the area that we're speaking about in St. Philip, there by Harry Smith, I think Senator Nurse did speak on it. You know, or was it Senator Maynard? One of them.
Both of them.
I think both of them.
Yeah.
But certainly we want to ensure that, Senator Maynard did go into it in quite some detail, that we want to ensure that Barbadians have access to housing all over this island and not just in select areas which may be internal and not closer to the coast.
She got lost somewhere.
So, cramped conditions in housing is well known. And so I really don't think that the issue of housing and the necessity for it can be something that really is a subject of any kind of negative debate or thought. Now, the issue was raised, and I just want to address it very briefly, and that is that, you know, this is an acquisition. So, you know, from time to time, the problem of ownership arises when an acquisition of a property is being pursued. But the position has always been that once the property has been correctly described, ownership or non-ownership will not be an obstacle or a hindrance to the acquisition. Ownership is dealt with and sorted out at the compensation stage. So I don't think that that is really an issue with this particular acquisition, because the description is there. I think all honorable senators had the opportunity to read it before we started this debate.
And of course, after the land tax arrears have been settled.
Then, in the issue of tourism and tourism developments, of course, tourism developments always have all sorts of views on it, and they should, and they're always welcome. But the Barbados tourism product is one that we know we will continue to have tourism in Barbados, certainly in the long term, because it does add something to our economy. It provides jobs to individuals. It provides growth within our economic sectors. It allows for the economic development of our country so that we are able to provide other services that are much needed by our citizens. It's not all of us that may be from St. Thomas that don't need any sort of social services. Some of us here may be well able to do whatever we want, whenever we want. But the average Barbadian looks towards government for the provision of certain social services, things like roads and hospitals, education, and these things. And of course, there's always a cost attached to these things. And so therefore, we would want our economy to always be one that is stable and sound, and that we as a government can continue to provide much needed services to our citizens. And what always struck me, certainly as an individual I've lived and also worked in many Caribbean islands, and I've always looked at their tourism product. And what always made the Barbados tourism product unique for me was the level of diversification of the product. In many of the islands that I've worked and lived in, the product that they had, some had primarily all-inclusive hotels. So the majority of the rooms, I'm talking about room stock now, were all-inclusive. And that seemed to be the mode that they wished, and that's fine. Everybody decides for themselves. Some did not have the level of diversification that we have, where you can actually rent condominiums. You can rent homes here, apartments. You don't necessarily have to stay in a hotel. And then you have different levels of the price of your accommodation. So you have from very basic style accommodation for those who want it, to the most luxurious of accommodation if you so desire it. And this is the only island that I've ever been to, and I think I'm very well traveled, that has such a large number of variety of accommodation for the size of the island. Never seen it. There may be others I don't know. I probably just never visit or work there. But I will also say that we also have the much needed value added that people are looking for within the tourism sector. And so tourism development brings that as well. And we do have the value added. Sometimes you go to an island and after work you're looking for something to do. But there's no value added. You know, Barbados has certainly cultural activities all the time. It has many sporting activities. It has places of interest. It really has a large value-added component to its tourism product. And the government will continue to develop the tourism sector responsibly, as we have always done, and we will continue to do so. But we will continue to provide a much-needed product or products going forward to ensure that our economy continues to grow, two, we provide employment for people, and we act in a responsible way and not in a way that is predicated by emotion and not by sound thought as to how your country must move forward. So, Mr. President, having said all of these things with regard to this acquisition here at Harry Smith, I would now like to move that this resolution do now pass.
The question is that the resolution under consideration be now passed. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. No. Methinks a divide has been called. A resolution, a divide has been called. The question again. The question is that the resolution do now pass. Honorable senators, yes, go on.
Senator Walcott?
Aye.
Senator Ms. Moore?
Aye.
Senator Dr. Springer?
Aye.
Senator Grant?
Aye.
Senator Ms. Cummins?
Aye.
Senator Dr. Haynes?
Aye.
Senator Sands?
Aye.
Senator Adams?
Aye.
Senator Franklin?
No.
Senator Ms. Rakes? Senator Reverend Rogers?
Aye.
Senator Boyce?
Aye.
Senator Mr. Maynard?
Aye.
Senator Honor Ellie Nurse? Deputy President, 12 honorable senators voted aye. 1 honorable member abstained, and 1 honorable member voted no.
The position then is that of the 14 votes cast, there were 12 ayes, 1 no, and 1 person abstained. The resolution, therefore, has been passed. Jerome? Oh, you forget you see? Sine die.
Mr. President, this now brings us to the end of today's business, and I beg to move that this honorable chamber be adjourned sine die.
The question is that the Honorable Senate adjourn sine die. Honorable Senators in favor, please say aye.